It was barely 6 in the morning when my phone screen lit up on the kitchen island. The coffee had just started dripping into the pot, filling my little house in Charlotte with that dark, comforting aroma. I picked up the phone sleepily, pushing my glasses up my nose. It was a text from Vanessa, my daughter-in-law. There was no "good morning," no asking how my arthritis was doing or how my week had been. Just a single line of text that read more like a final notice from a collection agency than a message from family: transfer $7,500 for Maya's 6th birthday. Immediately after the phone buzzed 3 more times, Vanessa had sent pictures. The first was of an event hall decked out with crystal chandeliers and gold Chiavari chairs. The second was a heavily embroidered silk dress that looked more appropriate for a royal coronation than a little girl's birthday. The third was an invoice for a massive 5-tier fondant cake. I just stared at the screen, the low hum of the refrigerator buzzing in the background. Maya was turning 6. At that age, kids would rather play with the cardboard boxes the presents come in than the actual gifts. But Vanessa had always used my granddaughter as a prop for her own social climbing. My son Julian would just nod and sign whatever she put in front of him, or more accurately, he would ask me to sign it. For the last 3 years, ever since my husband passed away, I had been the family's emergency fund. I'd paid for car repairs, covered months of back rent, and funded vacations they desperately needed to decompress. I always did it quietly, thinking it was the price of keeping the peace. But looking at that $7,500 demand delivered with such absolute entitlement, something inside me finally snapped. I didn't feel angry. I just felt an icy, crystal-clear resolve. I set my mug down on the counter. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and without hesitating, I typed the one response I had bitten back for years. Get a job. I locked the screen. I knew the piece was officially over, and before I could even pour my first cup of coffee, the phone started ringing. Julian's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering. I was in no rush. Outside in my small backyard, the sparrows were already swarming the bird feeder I'd refilled the night before. "What is your problem, Mom?" Julian's voice wasn't a yell, but it had that tight, demanding edge he'd adopted ever since he married Vanessa. "You can't talk to my wife like that. She's having a meltdown." I gave her some practical advice. I replied, leaning my weight against the kitchen counter. $7.5 grand isn't a birthday present, Julian. It's a down payment on a car. I heard him let out a heavy sigh, the classic sound of a man who'd made a habit of letting everyone else steer his life. "You know how important this is to her. All her friends are going to be there. Vanessa says if you don't help us out with this, well, you won't be welcome at the party. Or in Maya's life." And there it was, the bargaining chip. My access to my granddaughter was entirely conditional on my bank account. A year ago, a threat like that would have left my hands shaking as I reached for my checkbook. But today, in the quiet light of dawn, the manipulation just sounded tired and predictable. "If that's your decision, Julian, I respect it," I said. My voice was completely flat-stripped of the panic he was waiting to hear. "Have a nice day." I hung up before he could stammer out a response. The silence in the house felt incredibly comforting. I walked into my little home office where I kept my paperwork, opened my laptop, and logged into my banking portal. If they were so sure I was going to pay, it was highly likely they had already made some moves. Vanessa still had my credit card information saved from that time they desperately needed help covering a medical insurance deductible. I had never thought to ask her to delete it. While the dashboard loaded, I made myself a cup of tea. I wasn't going to be caught off guard. When the numbers finally populated on the screen, my gut feeling was confirmed, and the sheer audacity of my daughter-in-law was laid bare. Sitting right there under the pending transactions tab of my credit card were 3 recent charges that added up to almost the exact amount Vanessa had demanded in her text. There was a hold for $3,500 from Golden Leaf Event Space, another charge for $1,200 from a designer children's boutique, and a $500 deposit at a high-end bakery. Vanessa hadn't been asking me for money. She was notifying me of what she had already spent on my credit line. She'd booked everything under my name, using my funds to secure her fantasy party banking, on the fact that my fear of losing Maya would force me to just swallow the bill in silence, like I always did. I sat up straight in my wooden desk chair. I didn't shed a single tear. I didn't put my head in my hands and wonder where I went wrong as a mother. Guilt is a useless burden when the facts are staring you right in the face. My son and his wife saw me as a spineless ATM. I pulled open a drawer and took out a small black moleskin notebook. For the next hour, I combed through my bank statements from the last 3 years. I tallied up every temporary loan, every emergency they had never paid me back for. The down payment for his SUV, the credit cards I had bailed them out of twice, their living room furniture. The final number on the calculator sat just over $32,000. That was my retirement money. The nest egg my late husband and I had built through years of early mornings and quiet sacrifices. They had been draining it drop by drop, using my love for them as anesthesia. I closed the notebook. Maya's lavish party was not happening on my dime. I carefully read the cancellation policies on the websites of the vendors listed on my statement. Because the deposits were still pending, and because I was the primary cardholder and the only authorized user, I had the absolute power to stop them in their tracks. I looked up at the wall clock. It was 7 a.m. Time to make a few phone calls before the city completely woke up. The first number I dialed was the event hall. A young guy with a sleepy voice answered on the third ring. "Good morning, I'm calling to cancel a reservation made on my credit card," I said firmly. I gave him my name, Eleanor Vance, and the last 4 digits of the card. "And Mrs. Vance, I see the booking right here. It's for Maya's birthday." The young man said, typing on the other end, "If you cancel now, the pending funds will drop back into your account, but the date will be released immediately. Are you absolutely sure?" "Completely sure. Cancel the entire package," I instructed. I heard the click of his mouse. The first string was cut. Next, I called the children's boutique. The owner tried to push back, arguing that the dress had already been pulled for alterations. I politely reminded her that the purchase was made without the cardholder present, and that I had absolutely not authorized the charge. The moment I mentioned an unrecognized charge, she immediately agreed to void the order, clearly preferring to lose the sale rather than deal with a fraud dispute. I did the exact same thing with the bakery. By 7:30 a.m., the house of cards Vanessa had built with my savings was completely demolished. But I didn't stop there. I called my bank, reported my current card as compromised, and requested a new one with a different number. I took a pair of kitchen shears, cut the old plastic into tiny pieces, and tossed them into the trash right on top of the wet coffee grounds. I washed my hands, rubbed in some lotion, and pulled on a light cardigan. The morning air was crisp. I grabbed my car keys from the counter. Vanessa and Julian were probably expecting me to show up at their house any minute, to apologize for the text, beg to see my granddaughter, and resign myself to paying the bill. I was going to give them exactly half of what they expected my presence. But the rules of the game had permanently changed. I drove the 20 minutes it took to get to their upscale gated subdivision, a neighborhood whose HOA fees I coldly recalled I had covered for the last 6 months. I parked my compact sedan right behind Julian's massive SUV. Before getting out, I grabbed a small package wrapped in blue paper from the passenger seat. It was a beautifully illustrated children's book about stars and constellations. the only thing Maya ever wanted to talk about lately. I walked up the flagstone path and rang the bell. Vanessa opened the door. She was wearing a silk robe and holding her phone like it was a permanent extension of her arm. When she saw me, a smug smile spread across her face, a smirk of premature victory that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I knew you'd come to your senses, Eleanor," she said, turning on her heel to walk toward her sprawling marble kitchen. "Julian's upstairs in the shower. Maya's still asleep. You can just leave the check on the island." I stepped inside, closing the door firmly behind me. The house was spotless, filled with expensive furniture I had helped finance. I walked into the kitchen, but instead of pulling out my checkbook, I set the small blue package down on the marble countertop. "This is for Maya," I said evenly. Vanessa looked at the gift and let out a scoff. "A book, Eleanor, the party costs $7.5 grand. We have balances due. The venue needs final confirmation by 9 o'clock this morning." I leaned against the counter, folding my hands in front of me. I studied her with the detached curiosity of someone watching a bug trying to crawl up a glass window. "That's really not my problem anymore, Vanessa," I replied. She frowned, her haughty attitude cracking just a fraction of an inch. "What are you talking about? I ran the charges on your card last night. Julian told me that you—" Her words were cut off abruptly when her phone screen lit up with an email notification. An email from the event hall. All the color drained from Vanessa's face as she read the email. Her eyes darted frantically left and right. She opened another message, then another. "What did you do?" she whispered finally, looking up at me. The arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by genuine panicked confusion. "The venue. The boutique. They just sent me cancellation emails." "I canceled everything," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "It was booked under my name and you used my credit card without my permission. In the real world, Vanessa, that's called credit card fraud. But don't worry, I'm not going to make a legal issue out of it. I just stopped the payments." "You ruined my daughter's birthday!" she shrieked, totally losing her composure. She slammed her hand down on the marble island, making a salt shaker rattle. "You are a selfish, miserable woman. You just wanted to humiliate me in front of my guests." "You don't have guests, Vanessa, because you don't have a party," I replied, not backing up an inch. "And the only person who humiliated you is yourself, by trying to bill me for a lifestyle you can't afford." Heavy, rushed footsteps pounded down the stairs. Julian practically ran into the kitchen, his hair still wet, looking wildly back and forth between us. "What's going on? I could hear you yelling from upstairs." Vanessa ran over to him, gripping his arm like a vice. "Your mother canceled the reservations. She left us high and dry right before the party. Do something, Julian." My son looked at me desperately, expecting to see the submissive, guilt-ridden mother who always caved under family pressure. But I stood my ground, my spine straight, and my gaze unwavering. "Mom, please." Julian started slipping into his pleading voice. "You can't do this to us. People already know about the party. We're going to look like idiots. I promise we'll pay you back, little by little." I slowly unzipped my purse. It was time to show them that the well had officially run dry. I pulled the black moleskin notebook out of my bag and tossed it onto the marble island. The heavy smack it made echoed in the kitchen, silencing them both. "You want to talk about paying me back little by little?" I asked, flipping to the page where I had tallied up their debts. "Here's the ledger from the last 3 years. $32,000, Julian. Between the down payment on that SUV outside, the furniture you're standing in front of your wife's credit cards, and your rent from last year." Julian looked down at the floor, totally unable to meet my eyes. Vanessa, on the other hand, crossed her arms defensively. "We're your family. That's what money is for. What are you going to take it to the grave?" No, I said, snapping the notebook shut. I'm going to use it to live out the rest of my life in peace. I have paid my dues to this family with interest. As of today, the Bank of Mom is permanently closed. Julian took a step forward. Mom, you're overreacting. It's just a birthday party for a little girl. The book I left on the counter is for the little girl, I said, pointing to the blue package. The $7,000 gala was for Vanessa. And it's over. I picked up my notebook and tucked it back into my purse. Then I held out my right hand palm up. Julian, give me the spare key to my house. He blinked, totally thrown off by the sudden pivot. What? Why? We've always had it? For emergencies. You don't need it anymore, I insisted, keeping my hand out. Vanessa let out a bitter, sarcastic laugh. Don't give it to her. She's throwing a tantrum. She'll get over it in a couple of days when she starts missing Maya. I slowly lowered my hand. I nodded, realizing that demanding respect from people who fundamentally don't understand the concept was a waste of breath. Suit yourself. Have a nice day. I turned around and walked out the front door. I didn't look in the rearview mirror as I drove out of their neighborhood. I headed straight into the center of town. Vanessa thought that holding on to my spare key gave them leverage, that it maintained a tie I wouldn't dare sever. She was wrong. I pulled into the parking lot of a local hardware store. In less than 15 minutes, I had hired a locksmith to come out and rekey every single lock on my house that very afternoon. I paid for the service up front in cash. It was an investment in my own peace of mind. On the way home, I made one more stop at my insurance agent's office. I had been paying the premium for Julian's SUV through an automatic draft on my debit card for over a year. I sat down with the agent, signed the necessary paperwork, and canceled the auto pay. Next month, when the bill came due, the responsibility would land squarely on my son's shoulders. I pulled into my driveway just as the locksmith was finishing up. I took the new set of keys from him, feeling the heavy, cold metal in my palm. It was a feeling of ownership and security I hadn't experienced in years. My home was finally just mine again. That evening, I turned my phone off early. I made a simple dinner, poured myself a generous glass of red wine, and sat in my living room to read. There were no emergency calls, no manufactured financial crises to solve. The silence in the house didn't feel like isolation anymore. It felt like an impenetrable shield. The next few days passed in absolute tranquility. Nobody tried to reach out. I knew they were giving me the silent treatment, waiting for the guilt to eat me alive so I'd come crawling back begging for forgiveness. But the remorse never showed up. Instead, I spent the week tending to my garden and sleeping 8 hours a night. When Saturday, the day of Maya's birthday, finally rolled around, I was ready. Mid-afternoon on Saturday, I booted up my tablet to catch up on the news and briefly checked social media. One of Julian and Vanessa's neighbors, whom I had been Facebook friends with for years, had posted a few pictures. There were no crystal chandeliers or silk gowns. The photos were taken at the neighborhood park down the street from their house. They had set up 2 folding tables covered with plastic dollar store tablecloths. There was a stack of delivery pizza boxes and a standard brightly colored supermarket sheet cake. And right in the middle of it all was Maya. She was wearing a pair of comfortable shorts and a cotton t-shirt with a chocolate stain down the front. She was sprinting across the grass, laughing hysterically while chasing soap bubbles with a handful of other neighborhood kids. Her face was radiating pure, unfiltered joy, completely free of any pretension. That ridiculous $7,000 party was never what she wanted. It was only ever a runway for her mother to show off on. I smiled softly, watching my granddaughter get to just be a kid. It didn't hurt that I wasn't there. Knowing she was genuinely happy and knowing that I hadn't sacrificed my financial security to fund an absurd vanity project was more than enough for me. Around 6 o'clock that evening, I heard a metallic scratching sound at my front door. Someone was trying to jimmy a key into the deadbolt. The metal scraped against the lock a few times, followed by a dull, heavy thud of frustration against the wood. I stood up from the sofa, pulled my cardigan tighter around me, and walked into the entryway. I peered through the small side-light window next to the door. It was Julian. He was standing there entirely alone, holding the useless old key in his hand. His shoulders slumped in total defeat. I took a deep breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and opened the door, staying firmly behind the threshold. Julian looked up. He looked older somehow and deeply exhausted. He slowly lowered his hand and shoved the useless spare key into his pocket. "You changed the locks," he said quietly. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a man stating a reality he was only just beginning to process. "Yes, I did," I replied, keeping the door only halfway open. "Hello, Julian. How was Maya's party?" "It was good. She really liked the park." He reached back and scratched the back of his neck, a nervous tic he'd had since childhood, whenever he knew he was backed into a corner. "Mom, I got a notice from the car insurance company. It says the payment bounced." "That's right. I canceled the auto draft on Tuesday. You'll have to take care of those premiums from now on." A long, heavy silence stretched between us. He was waiting for me to cave, to offer a quick fix, to take pity on his situation. I just stood there, breathing in the cool evening air. "Things are really tense with Vanessa," he finally admitted, staring down at his shoes. "Without your card, I don't know how we're going to cover everything this month." "By working and sticking to a budget, just like everyone else does," I answered calmly. I pushed the door open a few inches wider. "If you want to come in and have a cup of coffee, you are always welcome in this house, Julian. But if you're here looking for my checkbook, you can turn right back around." He hesitated for a second. He looked over his shoulder at the street and then back into the warm, quiet hallway of my home. Finally, he nodded, leaving his entitlement on the welcome mat before stepping inside. As I poured him a cup of coffee, I knew our dynamic had changed forever. I was no longer his financial safety net, and Vanessa was going to have to figure out how to live in the real world. My life, my money, and my peace of mind belonged to me again. And without a doubt, it was the best investment I had made in years. In the end, I learned that setting boundaries isn't about shutting the door on the people you love. It's about protecting the space where you can safely be yourself. For years, I believed my worth was tied to what I could provide or fix, and I let love turn into a transactional exchange. But learning to say no taught me that genuine peace of mind is priceless. Today, I understand that anyone who truly loves you will value your well-being just as much as their own, and that throwing someone a life vest doesn't mean you have to let them drag you underwater. I finally learned well into my 60s that my inner peace is a gift, and this time I'm not letting anyone take it away.